He had learned long ago how to disappear in plain sight. People recognized his name, not his face. They knew the companies he owned, the deals he closed, the numbers attached to him, but not the man himself. That anonymity was intentional. On that evening, he was not in a boardroom or a private lounge. He sat quietly on a metal bench inside a public hospital, surrounded by the soft echo of footsteps, distant coughs, and the low hum of fluorescent lights. No assistance, no security, no phone pressed to his ear. Just a man in a dark coat, watching life unfold without filters. He had come there for a reason he hadn't fully admitted to himself yet. Not business, not charity, something quieter, something heavier. Across the corridor, a woman sat with a small child wrapped in a thin jacket that was clearly too light for the season. She wasn't begging. She wasn't crying. She wasn't asking anyone for help. She was doing something far more difficult. She was calculating. Her eyes moved constantly, between the clock on the wall, the child leaning against her side, and the nurse's desk at the end of the hall. Every movement suggested a choice being weighed. Every breath looked measured. The child was asleep, head resting on her lap, fingers curled loosely around a frayed strap of a backpack. The man noticed something then. The woman hadn't checked her phone once. Not because she was calm, but because she didn't have one. He had spent his life reading markets, predicting behavior, understanding incentives. Yet something about this woman unsettled him in a way spreadsheets never had. She stood up once, approached the desk, spoke softly to the nurse, then returned to her seat. When she sat down again, her shoulders dropped just slightly, as if absorbing news she had expected but still hoped to avoid. Minutes passed. The child stirred, opened his eyes, and whispered something to her. She smiled immediately, the kind of smile designed to protect someone else from the truth. The man felt an unfamiliar tension tighten in his chest. He told himself it wasn't his place, that he wasn't there to interfere. That observation was enough. But observation, he was realizing, carried responsibility. When the woman stood again, this time clearly preparing to leave, he rose from the bench without thinking. He didn't approach her with urgency. He didn't block her path. He simply spoke, calmly, as if continuing a conversation that had already started. "Excuse me." She turned, cautious but not defensive. "Yes." Her voice was steady, not cold, not desperate. "I overheard the nurse mention the pharmacy downstairs," he said. "It's closing soon." She nodded. "I know." There was a pause. He could have walked away then. He almost did. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a black card. "No logo." No name. He held it out. Not dramatically, not insistently. "Take this," he said. "For the next 24 hours. Her eyes flicked to the card, then back to his face. "No," she said immediately. "Thank you, but no." That answer surprised him more than any he had received in his life. "I'm not offering charity," he replied quietly. "I won't ask what you buy. I won't follow you. I won't interfere." She studied him carefully now. "And why would you do this?" she asked. He searched for an answer that wasn't false. "Because sometimes," he said, "money reveals more about people than power ever does." She looked at the child again, then at the clock. "How long?" she asked. 24 hours, he repeated. "After that, it's done. No strings." Silence stretched between them. Finally, she took the card, not with relief but with resolve. "I won't waste it," she said. "I don't think you will," he replied. As she walked away, he felt something shift. He had expected curiosity, perhaps even skepticism. What he did not expect was the weight. The weight of knowing that for the next day, every decision she made would be magnified by possibility, and by loss. As he returned to his bench, he glanced once more at the corridor where she disappeared. If you're still listening right now, pause for a moment. Not to judge what she might buy, but to ask yourself what you would do if every choice suddenly mattered. And more importantly, what you would refuse to buy. The man didn't sleep that night. He told himself he wasn't waiting for anything. But somewhere deep down, he already knew. The card wasn't the test. The choices were. The first transaction happened less than an hour after they parted. He noticed it only because he hadn't meant to. His phone was face down on the kitchen counter when the notification vibrated softly. A reflex from years of habit made him glance at it. A charge. Small. Ordinary. He stared at the number longer than he should have. It wasn't groceries in bulk. It wasn't electronics. It wasn't clothing. It was a pharmacy. He leaned back against the counter, arms crossed, and let out a slow breath. That made sense, he told himself. Anyone would start there. Still, he didn't feel relief. Only a growing awareness that this was no longer abstract. Somewhere in the city, she was standing in line, counting items, deciding what mattered most. He tried to return to his evening routine. Emails, reports, numbers that usually obeyed logic. But his attention drifted. He found himself imagining the pharmacy aisle, not as a place of convenience, but as a battlefield of choices. Medicine or warmth. Food now or supplies later. One thing instead of three. Another notification arrived. Public transit charge. He frowned slightly. She wasn't taking a taxi. She wasn't trying to save time. She was saving money. He realized then that the card had not given her freedom. It had given her responsibility. Across the city, the woman moved carefully through spaces she already knew too well. She did not wander. She did not browse. She walked with purpose, the child holding her hand, eyes heavy but curious. At the pharmacy, she avoided the shelves with colorful packaging and promises written in bold fonts. She went straight to the back. Generic brands. Lower shelves. Small print. She picked up one item, then put it back. Chose another. Paused. The child tugged gently at her sleeve. "Mom," he whispered. "Can I get juice?" She knelt to his level. "Not today," she said softly. "But soon. Soon." A word that carried more hope than certainty. Outside, the city moved quickly around them, unaware of the quiet math happening inside her head. The card sat in her pocket like a question. She used it again hours later. A grocery store this time. Not a large one. A local place with narrow aisles and handwritten signs. She bought food that didn't spoil quickly. Nothing indulgent. Nothing prepared. Rice, beans, bread. The child asked no questions. He had learned early which ones hurt. By the time evening fell, the man had stopped pretending he wasn't watching. He opened the transaction history, not obsessively, but attentively. What he saw unsettled him more than excess ever could. There were gaps. Long stretches with no spending at all. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't maximizing. She was waiting. That night, she sat on the edge of a borrowed bed in a borrowed room, counting what remained. Not in money, but in time. 24 hours was generous. But it was also merciless. Because it ended. She could feel the clock even when she wasn't looking at it. There was one purchase she hadn't made yet. One decision she kept pushing aside. The man sensed it too, though he didn't know why. He poured himself a glass of water and stood by the window, looking down at a city glowing with abundance. He had given the card believing he would learn something about her. What he hadn't expected was to start learning something about himself. If you're still here, listening to this unfold, notice what hasn't happened yet. No luxury. No surprise splurge. No moment designed to impress. Just restraint. Just quiet intention. And the night was far from over. Morning arrived without ceremony. No alarm. No urgency from the outside world. But inside her, the pressure had been building all night. The woman woke before the child, sitting upright on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall as if it might answer the question she had been avoiding since the card touched her palm. She checked the time. Less than 12 hours left. The card was still there, tucked carefully inside her coat pocket, wrapped once in a receipt she hadn't thrown away, not because she needed it, but because it reminded her this was real. Opportunity had a way of feeling unreal when you had lived without it for too long. She moved quietly, not wanting to wake the child, pulled on her coat, stepped into the hallway. The building smelled faintly of detergent and old paint. Temporary places always did. Outside, the city was different in the morning. Less forgiving. More honest. People walked with purpose. Coffee cups in hand. Jobs to go to. Lives that assumed stability. She joined the flow, blending in without belonging. The first place she went was not a store. It was an office. A low concrete building with faded lettering above the door. Inside, plastic chairs lined the walls, occupied by people who shared the same tired posture. Waiting. She took a number. Sat down. When her turn came, the conversation was brief. Forms. Questions. Answers she had already given too many times. She slid the card across the counter when payment was mentioned. The clerk hesitated. "This amount covers only part of it," she said. The woman nodded. "That's fine." She didn't ask if there was a discount. She didn't ask for sympathy. She paid what she could. The man saw the charge mid-morning. It wasn't large. But it wasn't small either. He leaned closer to the screen, reading the merchant name twice. Legal services. He felt his brow tighten. That wasn't what he had expected. He tried to imagine the logic behind it, but logic failed him. Why now? Why that? Another hour passed. Then another charge. A school supply store. Not toys. Not books with bright covers. Supplies. He exhaled slowly. Across town, the woman stood in a narrow aisle, holding a notebook in her hands longer than necessary. The child stood beside her, watching silently. She flipped the notebook open, ran her fingers across the blank pages. "How many?" she asked him. He shrugged. "Enough," he said. She smiled, just slightly. "Enough." The word followed her as she placed the items on the counter. She kept glancing at the clock near the register. Time was shrinking now. The margin for indecision had disappeared. There was still one thing she had not done. One place she had not gone. She could feel it waiting for her, heavy and unavoidable. The man tried to distract himself. He went into his office, sat through a meeting without hearing a word, signed documents automatically. His mind kept returning to the same thought. She wasn't acting like someone who believed this would last. She was acting like someone preparing for absence. By early afternoon, the final transaction appeared. It was not expensive, but it was decisive. The merchant name alone caused his breath to catch. Medical records. He stared at the screen, unmoving. This was not about comfort. This was not about today. This was about tomorrow without her. Across the city, the woman stood in a quiet office, signing her name carefully, hands steady despite the weight of what she was doing. She requested copies, organized them, placed them in a folder. When she left, she sat on the steps outside for a long moment, pressing her palms into her knees. She looked up at the sky. No tears. No drama. Just acceptance. The card felt heavier now, not lighter. She checked the time again. A few hours left. She could still spend more. She chose not to. Instead, she returned to the room, woke the child gently, and sat beside him as he ate. They talked about small things. A show he liked. A place he wanted to see someday. She listened as if there were all the time in the world. The man closed his laptop. He knew, before the 24 hours were over, that whatever he thought this experiment had been, it was no longer under his control. And the most important choice she made was not something he could ever undo. The 24 hours ended quietly. No countdown. No final notification. Just a simple line in the transaction log that read, "Authorization expired." The man sat alone in his office long after the building had emptied. The city outside his windows pulsed with its usual indifference, lights blinking on and off like nothing had happened. But something had. He reopened the list of transactions slowly this time, not skimming, not searching for totals. He read them in order. The pharmacy, public transportation, groceries, legal services, school supplies, medical records. There was a pattern now. Not excess, not indulgence. Preparation. He leaned back in his chair, hands folded loosely in front of him, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in years, money had failed to tell him the whole story. He requested the receipts. Not to audit her, to understand her. Each item confirmed what he already suspected. The medication wasn't for emergencies, it was maintenance. The groceries were chosen for longevity, not taste. The legal payment covered paperwork most people postponed until it was too late. And the medical records, he stopped there. Those were not for her. They were for the child. His chest tightened. He stood, walked to the window, and rested his forehead lightly against the cool glass. He had assumed need would reveal desire. Instead, it had revealed foresight. She hadn't used the card to escape her life. She had used it to make peace with uncertainty. He realized something then that unsettled him deeply. If he removed the amount from the screen, if he erased the numbers, what remained was love expressed through restraint. The next morning, he returned to the hospital. Not to find her, to confirm what he already feared. The answers were careful, professional, non-committal, but enough was said between the lines. She had been managing something quietly for a long time. The child didn't know. The system didn't care. And no one had ever given her enough space or resources to prepare properly. Until now. He left the building with a weight in his chest that no acquisition had ever produced. That afternoon, he did something he hadn't done in decades. He canceled meetings. All of them. He drove without direction for nearly an hour, letting traffic dictate his pace. At a red light, he saw a mother holding her child's hand, crossing the street. Nothing unusual. Except now he noticed everything. The way the child looked up. The way the mother adjusted her grip. He thought of the card again. How easy it had been to hand over. How impossible it was to take back what it had revealed. By evening he made a decision, not impulsive, not dramatic. A deliberate one. He didn't call lawyers. He didn't call foundations. He returned to the place where the story had begun. The hospital bench. It was empty. He sat there anyway. For a long time. If you're still listening, this is the moment to understand something important. This story is not about generosity. It's about what happens when someone finally has enough and chooses responsibility over relief. The man had believed wealth gave him power. What he learned instead was that it gave him access. Access to truth. Access to consequence. And access, once granted, can never be unlearned. He didn't know yet what he would do next. But he knew one thing with absolute clarity. He would never see money the same way again. He didn't go looking for her right away. Not because he didn't want to, but because he finally understood that showing up too quickly can sometimes undo what was built slowly. For days, the transactions replayed in his mind like a quiet ledger of choices. Not numbers, decisions. He began noticing things he had trained himself not to see. The way people hesitated before paying. The way parents spoke softly to children when answers were uncertain. The way preparation often looked like sacrifice from the outside. He returned to work, but something fundamental had shifted. Meetings felt hollow. Forecasts felt meaningless. He had spent his life optimizing systems. Now he saw the cost of what systems missed. A week later, he went back to the hospital. Same corridor. Same bench. She wasn't there. He waited anyway. Another week passed. Then, one afternoon, he saw her. She was moving more slowly now, the child's hand still in hers. Her posture composed but tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. She noticed him at the same time. There was no surprise in her expression. Only recognition. They sat. No greetings. No explanations. After a while, she spoke. I used the card, she said. I know, he replied. She nodded once. I didn't buy anything you'd notice, she added. Not the way people expect. That's why I noticed, he said. She looked at him then, really looked. You didn't give it to me to save me, she said. You gave it to see what I'd do. He didn't deny it. And now? She asked. He considered the question carefully. Now, he said. I know what responsibility looks like when no one is watching. They sat in silence again. The child leaned against her side, half asleep. After a moment, she reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. She didn't hand it to him. She simply held it. "I wasn't preparing to leave him," she said quietly. "I was preparing him to be okay if I had to." The words landed without force and without escape. He felt his throat tighten. "I won't take your help if it comes with control," she continued. "I've lived long enough without it to know the cost." He nodded. "I wouldn't offer it that way," he said. Another pause. Then, carefully, deliberately, he spoke again. "I don't want to fund a solution," he said. "I want to remove a problem." She waited. "For as long as you need," he continued. "Your time will be yours. His future will be stable. Not because of me, but because it should have been." She didn't thank him. She didn't smile. She simply exhaled. And in that breath, something loosened. They stood together when it was time to leave. No promises spoken aloud. No dramatic closure. Just alignment. Later that night, the man sat alone in his apartment, the city glowing beneath him. He thought about how easily money moves, and how rarely it listens. This time it had. If you've stayed until this moment, understand this. The most powerful thing money can do is not change a life overnight. It's to give someone the dignity of choice. Before the clock runs out, he didn't become a savior. He became present. And sometimes, that is the difference between help and harm. If this story stayed with you, consider supporting the channel. Stories like this don't end when the screen goes dark. They live in the choices we make, when no one is counting the cost. And somewhere in the city, a child slept peacefully, not because everything was fixed, but because someone finally saw what mattered. And somewhere in the city, a child slept peacefully, not because everything was fixed, but because someone finally saw what mattered. The man understood then that some stories don't end. They dissolve. They stop being about what happened, and start becoming about what remains. Days passed quietly. Nothing dramatic followed. No announcements. No public gestures. And that was exactly right. He didn't turn what he had done into a mission. He didn't name it. He didn't measure it. He let it exist. In the weeks that followed, he found himself noticing things he had trained himself not to see. The way people hesitated before making small payments. The way parents softened their voices when answers weren't certain. The way preparation often looked like fear from the outside, but was actually love underneath. He replayed the transactions in his mind again, not as numbers, but as moments frozen in time. Each one defined less by what she chose, and more by what she refused. Not comfort, not speed, not relief. She had chosen tomorrow. And tomorrow is expensive when you've lived without guarantees. The city around him didn't change. Markets rose. Headlines faded. Noise continued. But something in him had shifted permanently. He stopped measuring impact by scale. He started measuring it by consequence. For the first time, money felt less like control, and more like language. And language, when used carefully, can heal. Late at night, alone, he sometimes wondered how many lives had brushed past his own without him noticing. How many quiet calculations had taken place nearby. How many people stood at the edge of irreversible decisions with no margin for error. He understood now that most people don't need miracles. They need time. Time to decide. Time to prepare. Time to choose without fear pressing against their back. That was the real gift she had used. Not the card. The space. And once space exists, something dangerous happens. Truth arrives. She was never a symbol to him. Never an example. She was a mirror. And mirrors don't comfort. They clarify. If you're still listening, ask yourself something uncomfortable. Not what you would buy if money stopped being a problem, but what you would finally stop postponing. What decision you would make if fear loosened its grip just enough. What responsibility you would choose if you had the space to breathe. This story was never about a man with power or a woman in need. It was about the moment when control stepped aside and choice walked in. And once that door opens, it doesn't close quietly. Somewhere in the city, life continued. A child grew without panic hanging over every decision. A mother planned without racing the clock. A man learned to listen instead of lead.
No headlines. No applause.
Just alignment. And alignment, once felt, becomes impossible to forget. If the story stayed with you longer than you expected, that's not an accident. Stories like this don't ask to be remembered. They ask to be recognized. And when they are, they change how we see the cost of doing nothing.